Ma'am, start please.
Okay, sure. So, good afternoon, one and all. I, Dr. Gauri Cherath, again welcome you in the afternoon lecture of day 7 of 21-day winter school. So, dear participants, for our afternoon lecture, we have the privilege of hosting the remarkable and inspiring young scientist, Dr. Ayon Taraftar. I welcome you, Dr. Taraftar, in this training. So, before you proceed, sir, with your lecture, I would like to introduce you among our participants. So, Dr. Ayon Taraftar is currently working as scientist at ICR IVRI Izzatnagar in Division of Livestock Production and Management. He obtained his BTech degree from IIT Kharagpur in Agriculture and Food Engineering and later pursued masters from Pantnagar University and PhD from NIFTEM Kundli in Food Engineering. So he has more than 5 years of research experience, and in his early research days, he has worked extensively on biosynthesis and characterization of nanoparticles as a fully funded researcher at the Washington University in St. Louis, USA. So his current research focus is on non-thermal food processing operations, bioprocess modeling and optimization, machine learning, food waste valorization, advanced food characterization techniques, and precision agriculture. He has 125 plus scientific publication with 1790 citation with H index of 26 and I-10 index of 56. So Dr. Taraftar has been awarded with several meritorious fellowships during his academic journey, including the TQIP 2 Fellowship, NIFTIM Research Fellowship, UGC JRF Fellowship, CSIR Direct SRF Fellowship, and SUB DST International Travel Grant. In addition to this, he has been conferred with the Young Scientist Award of the Biotech Research Society of India and Best Poster and Best Oral Presentation Awards for his work in several conferences at international and national platforms. He serves in the editorial board of many journals of high impact factors like Journal of Food Quality, International Journal of Chemical Engineering, and the CITER Journal of Food. So he has also served as a guest editor of Bioresource Technology, Elsevier, and Journal of Food Science and Technology. Dr. Taraftar is currently working on the application of machine learning tools in image-based animal weighing, identification, and mapping of their production characteristics for profitable precision livestock farming. So it would be true to say that Dr. Taraftar has truly excelled in his domain and carved out a well-deserved reputation for himself. So we are delighted to have you, sir. Now I request you to please proceed with the presentation, Dr. Taraftar. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gauri ma'am, for the kind introduction. And thank you also for inviting me for this important event. So I welcome all the participants to this lecture on artificial intelligence and machine learning in animal sciences. In this lecture, I would be briefly describing the importance of machine learning in today's data-driven world and how we can actually use it in animal sciences, different applications, as well as different machine learning models that are there currently for data processing and even process modeling and optimization. So usually before I start this lecture, I say to all my participants that science cannot solve the ultimate mystery of nature. And that is because in the last analysis, we ourselves are a part of that mystery that we are trying to solve. So this is a very famous quotation by Max Planck, which actually shows that whatever we have developed so far, the advancements in scientific knowledge that we have, and the models that we have developed, all are basically a mimicry of nature. So even if you consider the development of the modern aeroplane, it was just mimicking the flight of a bird. So whatever we have is from nature, and for artificial intelligence to exist is basically the mimicry of the human brain. So let's delve into this presentation with a brief photograph that I wish to show you. We have two different images, one on the left and one on the right. So if I were to ask you, what is the similarity between these two images, you would start pondering about what the right image is, because the left image you would definitely recognize as a fashion model. So if I ask you what the importance of a fashion model is, you may not be able to answer this. But if you go to any public malls or even to any shops that sells clothes, you will see that mannequins are there. So those mannequins are basically representing how you would look in those clothes if you wear it. So similarly, the purpose of a fashion model is to show you how you would look in a particular set of clothes. The image on the right side is also such a model, just to explain how water flows in a pipe. So why I am telling you this is machine learning models that we have heard so far, the fancy term, actually has a word model in it. And if you are not able to understand what a model is, it is very difficult to actually apply any type of machine learning tools to your research. Therefore, uh, to briefly tell you, model is just the representation of any system, and machine learning is just the representation of the functioning of the human brain. Now, how does the human brain work? To explain you this, I would like to show you another image of a cute puppy. Most of you identified this image within seconds that it is a puppy, and a cute one at that. But how do you know that? Do you recognize it? You have been trained with such images from your early childhood days. And because of that, you now recognize that this image actually belongs to a puppy. Now, what happens if I remove the puppy and just show you a shadow? You can easily identify that this is a dog, and you can also identify that probably a lady is walking the dog in the park. So you recognize this just from the pattern of a or a shadow of a dog and a shadow of a lady. So your brain is so well trained with different kinds of data and different kinds of images from your childhood that you can now even identify shadows and associate it with the actual images. So that is how powerful the human brain is. That is how powerfully it functions, and that is how intelligent we are. So how do we transfer all this intelligence into things like computers and machines, like robots and even Chat GPT? How do we include that thinking ability, that thinking intelligence into these things? So to understand this, we have to first understand the hierarchy of artificial intelligence. So in artificial intelligence, if you consider it a very big bubble, there are different terms which you have heard over time in different lectures and probably in different courses, like computer vision, biometrics, robotics, sensors, deep learning, and so on, even data science. So what are these things? So you can see from this image that deep learning and machine learning are actually smaller domains of something called artificial intelligence. So AI is basically a very big thing of which we are trying to extract very a very small part, such as uh, the machine learning or the deep learning. So you have heard machine learning several times, but many people usually use it interchangeably with artificial intelligence. And it should be understood that these things are very different from each other. So how do we apply this AI and ML techniques? So there are different platforms for applying it, like MATLAB or Python. Many people have coded it but most of the biological scientists, as we know, we do not have coding ability. We do not have the knowledge of uh, producing very complicated codes to use this sort of techniques. But luckily for us, there are now tools that help us to use this artificial intelligence and machine learning very easily. So why do we want to use it? So in biological sciences, you know that there are many complicated problems like how does the livestock think? How does it feed? What is the behavior patterns? How can we associate it with very complicated variables like climate data or even blood data? Many things are there. So it is very complicated. So for complicated problems, we also require a complicated solution. So you must have used generalized models like regression models and all, and you have tested it on your data, and I found that it is not very efficient. So to tackle this problem, AI and ML actually provide us a very good platform where you can get a very high accuracy and you can actually represent the system more efficiently than with traditional models. But what is the criteria for using such ML applications? So the major criteria is that we need a lot of data. Because these models are all very data driven, if you do not have good quality and healthy data, it is very difficult to use AI and ML in any sort of application. So which sectors does this AI and ML associate to? You can think that from the brushing of a teeth to the most complicated rocket science, everywhere we are now using ML and AI, and this has essentially become a very important and essential part of our life. If you have used Google Gmail, you would see that nowadays when you type a particular sentence, just after 2 or 3 words, it actually predicts what you want to type further. So those kinds of applications actually help the humans to think on rather more important aspects of life and of work than working on trivial matters like writing an application or maybe correcting a text. So we can more incline our thought towards basic sciences and even advanced sciences rather than monotonous uses which can be actually dealt with AI. So all these machine learning tools and artificial intelligence tools also apply something for thinking, and it is called algorithms. And these algorithms are basically a set of rules that you follow over time. For instance, when you got up this morning, you had a set of rules that first I'll freshen up, brush my teeth, eat breakfast, then go to my workplace and then maybe listen to this lecture and then come back, think about what has been done throughout the day. So you have a set of rules to deal with in your day. Similarly, this AI and machine learning has to be given a set of rules that it follows when it is given a particular set of data. So to understand how powerful or how does this AI and ML process this data, to give an insight, we have an example here of a paper which was published back in February 2020. So this paper is on the use of artificial intelligence for early detection of coronavirus. And you will see in the abstract that the two companies are mentioned. One is Blue Dot and one is Metabiota, which anticipated the coronavirus. You would be amazed to hear that these companies actually used AI to predict coronavirus in 2019 when there was not even a single case in the world. Even better, in countries like Japan, Thailand, Taiwan, and South Korea, it actually predicted that there will be a virus of COVID, basically coronavirus, and it will actually change the health policies of the world and even the WHO guidelines. They predicted this much before even a single case was there. And this paper was also published back in February 2020. You would remember that this is much prior to our lockdown, which was in March. late March. And even the WHO warning was issued on 9 January 2020. And much before that, AI was able to predict that there will be such a outbreak. So this sort of technology can therefore be also used to not only preserve humankind but also help us predict a lot of things, uh, from natural calamities to your daily work life as well. So there are different kinds of machine learning categories that are used to predict such instances. So the major four categories that are there to this is the supervised learning, unsupervised, semi-supervised, and reinforcement learning types. So mostly in animal sciences, we use the supervised and unsupervised kinds of learning. So in supervised, basically you give somebody an input and you also give them the output. For instance, if you give a student the questions and also the answers to those questions and help them learn how different questions must be answered, he or she can definitely answer those questions in the future, maybe the same questions or maybe different questions of similar pattern. So these kinds of learning techniques are called supervised learning. And you have maybe heard of linear regression, logistic regression, neural networks, random forest, ANNs, and even naive Bayes, which are basically different classification and regression tools used for supervised learning. For unsupervised learning, we give the input, but we do not give the output. That is, we do not give the answers, and we ask the models to cluster or to uh, identify a pattern in which we can segregate two different things. For instance, if I give you a population of 100 animals and I say that there are cattle and buffalo in this population, you will be very easily able to segregate the different cattle breeds and even the buffalo breeds and even the different species among that herd, because you have a pre-associated knowledge with you. Similarly, but we did not give you how many number of cattle or how many number of buffaloes there will be. So you are able to do it with unsupervised learning or without supervised learning. So unsupervised learning basically gives you the
Doctor, you are not audible. I think there's some connectivity issue. So Dr. Taraftar will join you soon. Doctor, you are, I guess you are mute, Doctor. Please unmute yourself.
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, sorry for that. So slides are visible, I think.
Yes, these are visible.
Okay. Okay. So I was saying that in unsupervised learning, you can actually classify different things based on their patterns. And therefore, these two kinds of training models are mostly used in animal science. Now, there is also called semi-supervised learning, which is a mix of supervised and unsupervised. And finally, reinforcement kind of learning, which actually is defines mm, different learning patterns based on trial and error. For instance, if you want to train a car how to park or automated driving, like Tesla has now launched, those are basically based on reinforcement learning. It will move, it will hit something, and it will identify that these things should not be done, and then it will do it again and again and again till it learns how to think on its own. So reinforcement learning is the closest that is there to human thinking and learning. But for a basic starter or a person who is just diving into machine learning, supervised and unsupervised learning are something we'll go into more detail in the coming slides for better understanding of this. So as I said that all machine learning models are data driven. So first, to make a machine learning model, you need to collect data. And these data can be collected using different sensors or even from like reviews and collect those data, or you can collect primary data at your farm using such sensors. After you have collected, I told you about something called healthy data set. Now for healthy data set, you will require to remove out or weed out different data categories which can be considered as noise, or maybe which can be considered irrelevant or useless for the desired output. So such data can be actually labeled and removed based on your basic understanding. And after you have collected a good set of data, this information should be provided to the machine learning model as input. So different algorithms like artificial neural network, transfer learning, reinforcement learning can then be trained using this data to acquire knowledge. And of course, since these models do not have a basic understanding or interpretation of that data, you have to provide it with the basic interpretation by a human machine teaming to say that, okay, if it is more than 50%, if humidity is more than 50% or 60%, animal may be in stress. If it is less than this, animal may not be in stress. You can provide it some sort of input again to finally develop a proposed AI solution. So most of these startups that are coming up now on data science are actually using this sort of system of collecting data, providing it algorithms, then with interpretation to give different AI solutions. This is a basic kind of procedure that they are implementing for different AI solutions and even for mobile applications. Now, to give you an understanding of some of the important ML classifiers, the basic and the most laziest classifier would be the lazy algorithm or the k nearest neighbor. So if I say that there is a group of cats and group of dogs, and a certain animal comes into the picture suddenly, what this algorithm will do is it will find the distance between the set of dogs and the set of cats, and whoever it is nearest to is allotted. For this particular example, if it is nearer to class B and the number of members in class B, it will associate it to class B rather than going for class A. It could be inaccurate. For example, if it is a dog and if it is nearer to these cats, it should not be allotted in this category, but it will still do it. So this is one kind of machine learning algorithm, albeit not very accurate, but it is used, and hence it is called the lazy algorithm because it does not do much rather than just taking distances from particular set of points. Because of the problems associated with this sort of algorithms, different algorithms, better thinking algorithms were developed. For instance, the random forest or decision tree, which you might have heard in certain lectures or even in certain papers you have seen. For instance, if you are given a fruit of basket and you are asked to classify what kind of fruit is there in the basket, decision tree actually follows a set of rules in which there is a decision node which is represented by this green one, and there are some tree nodes and leaf nodes which are represented by this uh, orange circles, and there is a certain kind of mathematical operation that needs to be fulfilled for it to move forward. For instance, if we say that is it the shape of an apple, so you can provide it a round shape. Yes, it is a round shape. And if it is not, then it is discarded. Then it will ask whether this is red in color. If it is there, it will move forward, otherwise it will be rejected, and so on. So similarly, this decision tree is a single tree in which this classification is done. But if you have more number of decision trees, it will be called a random forest. So for instance, here from the tree 1, you get a class that this is an apple. In tree 2, you get this is an apple. But in, let's say, another classes, it gets a banana or a guava, maybe anything. So the majority voting will then be considered to develop the final class that yes, the basket of fruits that is there, it majorly consists of apples. So the more number of trees you have, you must have understood this by now, that if we have more number of trees, it is better to get higher accuracy. Similarly, there is one more machine learning model which is called support vector machines. So in this, again, if you have a set of dogs and a set of cats, what this does is it finds the boundary of the dogs and the boundary of the cats. What is the minimum criteria required to classify this as a dog or a cat? The minimum criteria. And then it develops a plane, a hyperplane, and the center point is the maximum margin that can be there between these two classes. So if any particular new data point, let's say this red pointer actually comes towards this side, a little bit towards the green side, it will be considered as dogs. And if it goes towards the right side, it will be considered as cats. So this is quite similar to the lazy algorithm, but because there is a plane, it provides, or a boundary, a minimum criteria boundary, it is much more quantitative as compared to the k nearest neighbor that you saw earlier, and therefore much more uh, accurate than that model. So many of the times I have heard researchers talking about that some of the experiments they do not have many data points, because in neural networks and even in machine learning models, you require a large data set, maybe thousands and 10,000s of data points, but maybe you have only 20 or 30 data points. So in such cases, support vector machines or support vector regression, SVR or SVM, are basically used as machine learning tools to model, because these sort of models do not require many data points because it is a classification algorithm. So this is something that can be explored in animal sciences, where there could be a shortage of data for a particular farm. Now there are more advanced form of machine learning classifiers that you may have heard of, like the deep forward neural networks, or the deep neural networks, recurrent neural networks, convolutional neural networks, and autoencoders. And even there are autoregressive models. So to give you an example, let's say you have a brain image, and in this brain image, there would be particular patterns that could be associated to happiness, that could be associated to sadness, that could be associated to cancer. So these patterns may or may not be recognized by a medical professional because of its minuteness, or maybe the pattern is developing, but it has not developed, and hence the medical professional has ignored it. So in such cases, convolutional neural networks, which do not actually take numerical data, but rather it takes image data in an image form, can be used to train the models to identify patterns and see whether these kinds of patterns can have some influence on health or not. Maybe a particular kind of pattern is more associated or more prone to the risk of cancer, or maybe they are more prone to the risk of kidney disease, something. So those patterns can be associated through training of convolutional neural networks and then used in even medical sciences. There are also something called autoencoders. So these autoencoders actually compress the input and provide you the desired output in a very condensed form. So you may have researchers, usually PhD scholars and masters, may have used Quillbot to reduce plagiarism in their different articles. So these autoencoders are basically used in that Quillbot software, where basically it is machine learning. So you can actually compress your content and reshape it and reconstruct it and provide a better non-plagiarized content. So auto encoders are something that are there already and we are using it, but we do not know. Similarly, if you're using ChatGPT for writing your, let's say, applications, or even some students may be using it for their assignments and even for answering questions. So those ChatGPT is also based on auto-regressive models. So basically, it is a generative kind of learning. It has a generative kind of learning ability. Which uses your past information that you have provided, and then it guesses whether the desired output, and you can actually tell it whether it is wrong or right, and it learns from it. So that is a generative kind of model, and it is called auto-regressive. That the all these kinds of thinking tools, or maybe AI based imaging tools, or a lot of tools have now come up, are all based on machine learning algorithms. And therefore it is very important for scientists and researchers of today and tomorrow to have a basic understanding of how these models function and what kind of models there are to use. In animal sciences, these kind of models are quite new, novel, and very it has been explored to a very less extent. And therefore I am very happy that such a winter school has been organized to actually provide PG and masters and even professors to understand this technology and use it in animal sciences. So now I would tell you about a very specific kind of machine learning tool that we have been using for the past 8 to 10 years, which is artificial neural networks. This is one of the simplest machine learning model there is, and you can very easily use it for your data set. If you are in PhD, you can use it on your master's data point. If you are a faculty in any institute, you can use it to your research data of your students as well as your own. So this artificial neural network was actually invented back in 1943. So you understand the gravity that how backward we are right now. It was invented back in 1943, and we usually consider it as novel now, even into 2023. So we need to fasten up and speed up our work. So this was invented by Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts back then, two different scientists, and they used it for the computational modeling and threshold logic, which you saw in decision tree even. So they gave the concept of an artificial neuron based on the human neuron that we know, with the different nucleus, dendrites, axon, and the data being transferred from this lower points. So in artificial neuron, it works on a similar pattern. It will get some inputs, like there is from inputs from dendrites, and from the synapse, like electrons transfer in the brain whenever we learn something new. Here also, in the node or the artificial neuron, there are different outputs that can actually generate such kind of learning, and it can be again transferred into some other artificial neuron or even for your desired purpose. So here we have an example where we have given three inputs, but there could be multiple inputs as well. And there is something called weights and something called bias or B in an artificial neuron. So these weights are actually associated to something like, let's say, I give you an example. If you had lunch right now, so if you had three plates in front of you, one with let's say paneer, one with let's say loki, and one with let's say uh, bitter gourd or karela, you would definitely prefer paneer over different kinds of other vegetables, because you have a taste of all three, and you can now associate your taste with your liking. So these you have already given weightages in your brain that I would like to eat that over these two different veggies. So that is something that has to be replicated to a machine learning neuron as well. So here also we have different weightages. So different inputs can be given weights based on what desired output we want. And the second term that we have in an artificial neuron is a bias. Let's say whenever a person enters, let's say when I entered into this online lecture, you must have already developed a bias towards me, because humans are like that. They are programmed to have a bias towards people. So they may think that this person is a very lazy person, or a very तो बहुत बेकार आदमी है, बहुत अच्छा आदमी है. So that is something that you have a perception of, a bias of. So this bias is also there in neuron towards the data. It can think that the data is not very perfect. It can think that data, maybe this data is more important, these are not very important, and accordingly it can associate a random bias towards a set of data, any data set. And again, when this neuron is under function, when this lecture progresses, you will understand that the bias actually changes, and even the weights also change. Like whenever you go through any program, you understand the importance of that program, and you understand how which things are more important and which things are less important. So there is a training or a learning involved, and accordingly there is an output generated. So how do these ANNs actually work? So let's say you have two inputs in an input layer, we'll call it an input layer. And then this inputs can produce signals to the hidden layer. And then there is an output layer with different biases and different weights. To give you a better understanding, let's say a student is studying for an exam. So when you start studying on the first go, when you read the entire book, maybe you will remember 5% or 10% of it. What happens when you read it 5 to 10 times? Maybe now you will remember 30%, 40% of it. What happens if you read it 10,000 times? Now maybe you will remember 80% or 90% of it. So what did you do? You went through a lot of iterations, a lot of training sessions. You trained yourself with the different information that is provided in that book, that is there in that book. And you accordingly, even instinctively, even you decided which chapter is more important, which topic is more important, and then you um, thought of your output. So let's say you took in that all that information through your eyes, which is the input layer, and you produced all that information from your fingers by writing, or maybe from your mouth by speaking. That is the output layer. All your processing has been done by the brain, which is not actually visible, and therefore it is called the hidden layer. So we have three different layers in the artificial neural network. So let's say we have two different inputs. We will give different weightages to those inputs based on their importance to produce the the most and the best uh, output, and that output should actually be very similar to your target. So if the student has been given an exam paper, the output should be similar to that which was there in the book. In the book, it was target or the desired output, and this is the predicted output that you have created after you have learned the entire book. But there are bound to be errors between these two things, what you have written and what is there in the textbook. That's why you get different marks. And therefore, if you produce that error, it can actually be back propagated and given to you as feedback, like showing you the answer sheets. And accordingly, you can change the weightages and change the biases to produce a better result in the next try, or maybe in the next exam. So you have now a better predicted ability, or the ability to generate good answers, and which is more closer to the target. So there are many things to be told during the course of this training. We will call this the training module of the artificial neural network, as it has to be trained to act like a human being. When, let's say, an student is studying for an exam which is tomorrow, and he's studying for an exam which is 1 month after, maybe the learning rate will be very different. If you have an exam tomorrow at 11 p.m. in the night, your learning speed will be extremely high as compared to that which will be there if your exam were 1 month after uh, the date you have started. So these models, ANN models, also have to be equipped with such a learning rate, because we want it to be as human as possible. So therefore, there is something called a learning rate which actually adapts with the type of input that you have provided. If the input is very complicated, the learning rate can be adjusted, or this model can automatically adjust it to produce the desired output. If the Even if the data is not very complicated, the learning rate can be very less, and still a good predicted yield can be generated. So such learning ability is there. The ability to change weightages of inputs is there, and the ability to generate bias is there. So you can understand how complicated, how interconnected and parallel processing neurons are there in the artificial neural network, which is actually required to make it more human like. For the processing, like in the human brain, processing is done through different movement of electrons. Here we have something called transfer functions, which are basically mathematical functions, but I will not bore you with the complicated equations here, which can be found anywhere else. And therefore would like to tell you just the concept that this functions are help transform the input data so that it is more closer to the output data. So if you have two inputs, let's say the milk yield and maybe the temperature, you can actually predict, let's say, what will be the milk yield in the future, or maybe what will be the health of the animal in the future. So I told you that the first step to this is training the model. The second step, if we go back to the student, uh, he or she will give the exam. So that is the testing. In the testing, we will provide it random inputs, input 1 and 2, which was not used for training of the data. Like you are given questions which were not there when you studied for the exam. That is the testing phase. And then there is something called validation, that after you have given the test, your exam answer sheets need to be checked, and then you will be provided with the error again, and then you can actually validate whether I can reduce that error or I have done properly or not. So these three steps are there: training, testing, and validation for the artificial neural network to work on. So you can associate it with to a newly admitted student who is learning for something, who is going through an exam, and who is also improving at that time. So these three functions have been associated to artificial neural networks, and it is so wonderful that we can actually now use this to any application in animal sciences to make it learn just like a student. So what are the different components that I had talked about? So there are two different descriptors which I usually tell is the ANN infrastructure descriptors and the model development descriptors. So infrastructure descriptors, you have seen how many hidden layer neurons will be there, how many hidden layers will be there. For instance, if you see this image, there is a single hidden layer with three different neurons. So if you increase the number of neurons, it actually increases its processing power. And if you increase the number of hidden layers, it is like parallel processing. Like you have Core i3, Core i5 processors in which there are 4 or 5 processors working simultaneously. It's like 4 or 5 students working simultaneously to pass an exam, maybe through cheating or maybe by their own sheer will. So that is something called hidden layers. And then we have hidden layer neurons. How the training was done, like how the student was learning for that exam. Everybody has their own learning method and their own training method. Similarly, ANNs also have different training algorithms. So based on that, you can actually choose what kind of data there is, and you can try different algorithms to see which algorithm is most suited for you. So it's a trial and error kind of operation. And again, which function has been used to actually process the data. So these are all ANN infrastructure descriptors. And there are also some things like model development descriptors like training, testing, validation, what we talked about in the previous slide. How much to assign for training, how much for testing, and how much for validation. So usually the rule is 70, 15, and 15. 70% data you should have for training, 15% for testing, and 15% for validation. And in any case, it should not go beyond 95 and 5, because that is the worst case scenario. Although you have trained it better, but your testing and validation scores will suffer. So therefore, the ideal is 70%, 15%, and 15%, which is usually used in different literatures, and I also recommend the same. What will be the error criteria? How much error are you willing to tolerate? Like for instance, if we have exams, the passing marks will be the error criteria. Like beyond this, you will pass. If you do not get at least this much marks, you will fail. So here also the error between the target, that is your desired output, and your predicted output should be given, which is also reflected in the mean square error and the R square, which gets affected from this. Next, we have number of iterations. How many times the model has to train on that data? Like how many times do you have to read that book? That is also something which is very important. And any other training specifications that you want to give. But we have to be very critical in selection of these parameters, as it can affect directly the prediction efficiency. And there is also a problem of overfitting, where you have a very simple problem at your hand, but you have used ANN modeling to actually map those variables. So that is like चींटी मारने के लिए हाथी को ले आए. So you should always avoid overfitting of data, which will definitely happen if you have a linear kind of data, and you can very easily use a simpler linear model, but you have used a machine learning model. Also, you do not need too many neurons. As you have heard, too many cooks can spoil the food. Here also, if you have too many neurons, your data can be over processed, and which can lead to a bad network. And also, if you have very less data, you should avoid using machine learning tools. Maybe you can go for support vector regression or support vector method models, but you should not use ANNs for applications which have very less data sets. So we have used this machine learning for different bioprocessing operations. I'm actually from a food engineering background, so we have used it for drying, hydrolysis, mixing, maybe fermentation is more associated to you, extraction, and even for experimental designs, there are some papers which have used ANNs with design of experiment techniques for improving their bioprocesses. So I would be giving 2 or 3 case studies here to explain you better how these work. For instance, this is the vacuum drying process of moringa leaves. Moringa, as you know, nowadays is being used for animal feed for pigs and even goats, because of its high antioxidant property and minerals. So here we used 2 different input variables, which is the drying temperature and drying time. And we actually determined the moisture content, and basically one more term which is called moisture ratio. So what we did was we took different temperatures like 50, 60, 70 degree, and then we had the drying time, maybe let's say 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, and we then predicted the moisture content. So if you know that in powders, if we create a powder of this moringa leaves, it is meant to last longer as compared to general moringa leaves, which can actually spoil over time due to the growth of fungus and high moisture. So if we were to scale up this process of drying moringa leaves to a pilot scale from a laboratory scale, you would actually need a lot of experiments to determine how we can reduce the moisture content by varying temperature and time. But with this simple model, of ANN, we can actually just put in how much temperature and time we need, and therefore how much moisture we will get in the end product. And therefore, it will save you a lot of time, energy, and even it will give you a very good quality product. So such a model we have developed, and with a prediction accuracy of more than 99%, and using different combinations of transfer functions and training algorithms, which can actually be changed. And this paper was also published back in 2021. Similarly, we have tried to map the enzymatic hydrolysis process of different damaged wheat grains, which can also be used as a bioactive compound in animal feed. So we have in here the inputs: hydrolysis time, substrate concentration, and enzyme concentration. And we actually predicted how much reducing sugar is there in the end product so that it can be fermented and made into a product, final end product. So here also we had a prediction accuracy of 93.2%. You will see here in this graph that the experimental data, which is given by blue lines, and how the ANN is matching it. So your usual models will just be this straight line like this, as the red pointer is showing. It will just give a straight line, and the R square will be maybe 40%, 50%. But in ANN, it actually maps even a single data point. Each and every data point is being covered by this model very efficiently, and therefore the prediction is much better in ANNs as compared to general traditional your regression models. We also used it for determining viscosity of different products. And here also, we found that ANN prediction, even in such a complicated process, was 86, more than 86%, where general regression failed tremendously, and it gave less than 41% of accuracy. So you can see, appreciate that ANNs are much more capable than general regression models. And to give you an insight of how we can use it in animal science, we have been using it in our LPM section at IVRI, Nagar campus. Here we have used it for determining the pig live weight using this machine learning model. You must know that when we do it through a traditional method, this pigs actually go through a lot of trouble, and even the stockman is prone to injury. It compromises animal welfare, and therefore we thought how to measure the weight of pigs non-invasively without even disturbing those pigs just in their natural habitat. So we developed a chamber in which we can take images top view images of this pigs, and we use the MATLAB interface which is available to train our ANN model with the images of these pigs, and we associated them with the pig live weight, and we were able to produce very good results. Now the accuracy is more than 88%. We are now able to predict just from the top view of this image the live weight of not just a single pig, but also the entire herd. So herd management through this technique can be done. So this is some of the images. For example, we have taken when the pig enters, we have a motion triggered sensor. So as I told, for data collection, we can also use sensors. The motion triggered sensor is there, which actually captures the top view of that image. That image is then processed, like using image processing techniques like changing it to grayscale, subtracting the background, and then we have a binary image which actually shows the outline of that pig. So from the outline, we can actually determine important parameters like major axis length, which is basically associated to the body length of the pig, minor axis length, which can be associated to the girth of the pig, and then we can link it to our actual weight of the pig to get the model. And so we tested it for from three different heights and at three light intensities, and we were able to generate those pixels from the image and train it in machine learning model with inputs like major axis, minor axis, eccentricity, area, perimeter, etc. And we got the predicted uh, live weight with high accuracy. We have now converted this into a mobile application with 88% accuracy, and it is still in the process of coming up. Probably it will be soon launched to Google Play Store. And another research that we are now conducting is identification of cattle through their muzzle images. Since there was already some of the work that has been done in different countries, we are also trying to map different features like the length and width of the muzzle at different areas, 20% area of the top view of the muzzle, the 2 and 4 area of this image, and even the tip of the muzzle, the pattern we have seen. So the ridges and even different ridges and this dots that we have here, we are now annotating it and then associating it with the milk yield of the animal to see if we can actually map those. As you know that these are actually more bulging when the milk yield is more. So we are trying to calculate the area and the diameter of different ridges and then associating it with the milk yield. And we are doing it through convolutional neural networks, another machine learning model which takes into image as data and then gives out the output in the desired form that we want. So we have now collected 200 images from 200 animals, and our accuracy is very reasonably 97.9%. So we can now come up with something like an animal identification come traceability system as in addition to predicting its milk yield just from muzzle images. So such things can also be done just using machine learning models. So to give you some take home points, you should know that machine learning is a category of AI and not the same. And you require a lot of healthy and large data set, which is a prerequisite for any machine learning model because these are data driven models and not actually associated to any basic thing, basic data that you have. You need a lot of data, and it could be supervised, unsupervised, semi-supervised, or reinforced. Although you will be more using supervised and then going into unsupervised, but supervised is the way to go for you. And neural networks can be used for regression, also for forecasting, and even for classification that we are doing right now. And models based on ML can be trained in any other way. Like if you have a model for predicting some, let's say, temperature, the same model can also be used for predicting the milk yield. You just have to provide it the correct input, train it with the desired output, and then you will have your AI solution with you. So with this, I think I'll end my presentation, and thank you so much. If you have any queries, I think we have some time. I would like to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. It was really informative, and you have, in a very simple way, you have make us understand the very complicated machine learning and AI intelligence. So I really thank you. And
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
I do have one question before we go to the participants.
Right.
You said in Moringa, that Moringa leaves, you have developed one model, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So how many observation you need for to develop one model?
Okay, that is a very good question. For drying processes, actually it depends on what kind of process you have. So since drying is not a very complicated process, I consider it not very complicated. So
Yes.
usually the data point should be more than 100,
Okay.
initial number of data points. But for your livestock systems, we have even used more than 66,000 data points for training a particular model. But for
So
simpler
you have to set
processes, lesser. Hmm.
okay. So you have to set the library for a particular parameter or the model,
Right,
right?
right. That is a very good word, a library. So if you have, let's say, a bioprocess like drying or even fermentation, if you can develop a library of images or a library of data, that library can actually be accessed by anybody in the world for training of their model. Let's say you have developed a model for drying of moringa, If anybody else has also developed such a model, their data you can import and you can train your model again with that new data. So these models are adaptable. You can train it again and again with different kinds of data to make it more robust, make it more holistic. So that is a very good option that we can do. So a lot of researchers are now going into metadata analysis. If you have read some papers, they actually go through different review of literatures and means go through different papers. They collect that data from that source, and then they train their model with it, and then they make a model and suggest that we can use it. So that is a very good research area that somebody can go into.
Right, Doctor. Thank you very much. So let's take the questions of participants if they have any. So participants, you may write in the chat